College was supposed to be an escape, a chance to rewrite my story after high school's dull, suffocating days. But instead, it felt like the universe had just handed me a darker, lonelier sequel. I was 21 when I transferred to Columbus State University, leaving behind the quiet familiarity of Creuset for the sprawling, restless maze of Columbus, Georgia. The city pulsed with life, clubs, bars, restaurants, but it all felt like a distant world, one I was too invisible to enter. My tiny campus apartment became a tomb, where the glow of Turner Classic Movies flickered against the walls and kept the silence at bay. No friends, no parties, no connections. Just me and the eerie comfort of old films. But even in my solitude, I craved a thrill, a reason to step out of the shadows, to feel alive. My fascination with the paranormal filled the void. Columbus was a treasure trove of ghost stories. Crybaby Bridge, the Riverwalk haunted by Civil War spirits, and my obsession, the abandoned Chuck E. Cheese on Macon Road. This wasn't just any derelict building. It was a relic of my childhood, a place my parents used to take me before it mysteriously closed in 1999. Heavy chains wrapped around the front doors made it clear that no one was meant to return, but I couldn't shake the pull it had on me. Through the cracked glass and creeping vines, the ghost of the past lingered. Faded games and displays rotted away like tombstones in an arcade graveyard. And then there was Chuck. The animatronic mouse loomed behind the counter, frozen in time. His signature purple shirt hung awkwardly on his metallic frame, his eyes locked in a lifeless stare. Yet, it felt like he was watching, always watching. The place had secrets. The more I researched, the deeper I fell into its shadowy history. Official reports said it closed due to accidents and equipment failures, but the vagueness of it all only fueled my curiosity. No injuries were ever documented, no lawsuits filed. It was as if the entire story had been buried alive. Rumors swirled like smoke. Ghost sightings, malfunctioning animatronics that moved on their own, and an unshakable sense of unease that drove away anyone who dared get close. Still, the doors stayed locked and I stayed obsessed. That was until I met PJ. He found me in the college library, a rugged, sharp-eyed figure who seemed to know exactly what I was looking for. He wasn't like anyone I'd met, intense, magnetic, and undeniably strange. "You're digging into the Chuck E. Cheese, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and deliberate. I froze, my heartbeat quickening. How did he know? Let's just say, "I've been there," PJ whispered, leaning closer. His grin was faint, but unsettling. "And if you're serious about finding the truth, I can show you things you won't believe. But you better be ready. It's not just ghosts in there." For the first time, I wasn't sure if my curiosity was leading me to answers, or something much darker. PJ wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. She didn't care about perfect makeup, tight clothes, or fitting into some manufactured mold of beauty. Her short, jet black hair framed her pale face, untouched by sunlight, and her grungy hoodies and ripped jeans gave her an edge that felt authentic, untamed. She was wild in a way that I couldn't place. Neither an emo cliché nor a manic pixie dream girl. She was just PJ. We met by chance in the library, her presence pulling me out of my usual haze of isolation. She was friendly, sharp, and more confident than I could ever hope to be, even if she carried her own unconventional charm. Over time, she became my partner in crime. We'd go to movies, hang out in my apartment, and share stories late into the night. It felt incredible to have someone to share my weird little world with, even if deep down I wished we could be more than friends. But PJ had her boundaries. She described herself as mostly gay, though there were moments when the line between friendship and something more blurred. Drunken nights when she'd make the first move, or when she'd teasingly demand pictures from me, her smirk daring me to keep up. One cold January night, just after my 22nd birthday, we were sprawled on my worn-out couch, working our way through a 12-pack. The conversation drifted, as it always did, back to the abandoned Chuck E. Cheese on Macon Road. PJ had grown up in Columbus, and she knew the place well. She'd been there every weekend as a kid with her brother, Justin. She even had an old photo booth picture to prove it, Justin with his surfer boy grin and her barely older than a toddler, wearing a crown from one of Chuck's birthday parties. But there was something in her voice whenever she talked about it. Something guarded, like she was keeping the real story locked away. On this night, I pushed her. Maybe it was the beer, or maybe it was the gnawing curiosity that refused to leave me alone. "So, what's the deal with that place?" I asked, leaning back and watching her through the dim glow of my apartment. "You've got to know more than you're letting on. Is it really haunted, or what?" PJ's lips twitched into a crooked smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're obsessed, huh?" she said, taking a long sip of her drink. "Can you blame me?" I shot back. "You've been there, right? What's it really like?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her bottle. "It's not haunted. Not like people think. No creepy animatronics walking around, or whatever." Her laugh was dry, humorless. "But there's something about it. Like the air in there is wrong. Everything feels warped, like it's frozen in time, but off." Her words sent a chill crawling up my spine. "So, why did it shut down?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile faltered, and she looked away, her hands tightening around the bottle. "There was an accident. A bad one." "What kind of accident?" I pressed, my heart pounding. PJ's gaze dropped to the floor, her face pale. "A fire," she said quietly. "It started near the ball pit, and a few kids, they didn't make it out. Some of them got trapped by the machines." I set my bottle down, my fingers trembling. "That's awful," I murmured, unsure what else to say. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "The whole town just decided to forget about it, to leave it behind. But it's not something you can really forget." The silence hung heavy between us, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I asked the question that had been clawing at me since the moment we met. "How do you know all this?" PJ hesitated, her breath hitching. "Because I was there," she said, her voice cracking. I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. "Oh, PJ, I'm so sorry." She shook her head, her eyes glistening but defiant. "I got out," she whispered. But Justin didn't. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I reached out, but she pulled away, retreating into herself. "I shouldn't have said anything," she muttered. "PJ, don't," she interrupted, her voice raw. "Just don't." The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. I wanted to comfort her, to take away even a fraction of her pain, but the truth loomed between us like a ghost, impossible to banish. And in that moment, I realized something else. Whatever had happened in that Chuck E. Cheese all those years ago hadn't just scarred PJ. It had left something behind, something that was still waiting. I wrapped my arm around PJ, pulling her close. Her sobs came quietly at first, then like a flood, years of agony finally breaking through. She clung to me tightly, and for a moment, the weight of everything she carried felt like my own. "No, it's okay," she murmured between tears. "I've learned to live with it." Her words hit harder than I expected. 15 years of pain had shaped her, but it hadn't broken her. "You know," PJ said, her voice trembling, "people always make up those dumb stories about the animatronics being possessed by the kids who died. Just another way to make fun of a tragedy, I guess." I nodded, unsure what to say. "That's awful." "Yeah," she said with a weak smile, wiping her face. "But in some strange way, I like it. It's like, when I go there, I can still feel Justin. Like he's running around, playing the games, laughing. It's almost comforting." Her words sent a shiver through me. "That's kind of beautiful," I offered, and she flashed me a faint but genuine smile. Then, leaning in closer, her voice dropped. "But those animatronics? They don't come to life?" I laughed nervously, relieved by the change in tone. She handed me my beer, and I took a long swig, trying to steady my nerves. "You want to go tonight?" she asked suddenly, her eyes glinting with mischief. I nearly choked. "What? Seriously?" "Yeah," she grinned, her excitement infectious. "Call it a late birthday present." By the time we arrived at the abandoned Chuck E. Cheese, it was past 1 a.m. The January wind bit into us. But PJ seemed unfazed as she pulled a small key from her pocket and unlocked the back door. "You've had that this whole time?" I asked, more impressed than I cared to admit. "Perks of knowing the right people," she said with a wink. Inside, the darkness was absolute. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that feels alive. PJ led the way, her phone flashlight cutting through the blackness. The narrow hallway was eerily quiet, save for the sound of our breathing and the crunch of debris beneath our feet. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She turned and grinned. "What? Scared already?" Before I could answer, we reached the main room. Dim light from the parking lot filtered through grime-covered windows, casting long, distorted shadows. The space was hauntingly familiar, like stepping into a memory warped by time. And there they were. The animatronics stood on the stage, larger than life and frozen in time. Chuck E. Cheese himself stood front and center, his painted grin impossibly wide, his red derby hat cocked jauntily to the side. Pasquale, Helen, and Jasper flanked him, their cartoonish features grotesque in the half-light. "They're taller than I remember," I murmured, my voice catching in my throat. "They always are," PJ replied, her tone unreadable. We approached the stage, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Chuck E.'s eyes were following us. They seemed to gleam in the dim light, reflecting something I couldn't see. "Creepy, right?" PJ said with a smirk. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, just a bit." Past the stage was the arcade. The machines were exactly where they'd always been, like ghosts of a long-lost era. Even without power, the colors and designs seemed vibrant, almost alive. But my gaze was drawn to the ball pit. It sat in the far corner, the plastic spheres bright and cheerful against the backdrop of decay. A thin layer of dust coated everything, yet the pit seemed untouched, almost pristine. "That's where it happened," PJ said softly, her voice breaking the spell. I turned to her, my throat dry. "The fire?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the pit. "That's where most of them were." Justin was near the edge, but he didn't make it out. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. "Let's go," PJ said suddenly, grabbing my hand. "Go where?" "To the stage," she said with a strange smile. "I want to show you something." Reluctantly, I followed her back to the animatronics. Up close, they were even more unsettling. Their painted faces seemed to mock me, their frozen poses both comical and menacing. PJ climbed onto the stage, her steps deliberate. "Come on," she called, holding out her hand. I hesitated, but finally joined her. She pointed to a small lever hidden behind Chuck E.'s foot. "What's that?" I asked. "Find out," she said with a mischievous grin. I pulled the lever, and the room plunged into darkness. Then the stage lit up. The animatronics jerked to life, their movements stuttering and unnatural. Chuck E.'s jaw dropped open, and a warped, tinny version of Happy Birthday began to play. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. "PJ, what the hell?" But she didn't answer. When I turned, she was gone. The glass prize case stood as a relic of another time, preserved yet obsolete. Rows of cheap toys, VHS tapes, and trinkets glittered faintly under the dim light, worthless to anyone but a child flush with tickets. My gaze lingered on the case, its contents frozen in a time capsule of forgotten joys and faded laughter. PJ let go of my hand and wandered up to the case. "It hasn't changed much," she murmured. From where I stood, I could see the thick chains coiled around the front doors, barricading us in like a fortress. "I'm honestly surprised," she continued, her voice tinged with awe. I stumbled forward, my drunken legs betraying me, and bumped into the glass case. The sound reverberated through the empty room, breaking the stillness. "Careful," PJ laughed, her expression softening as she glanced back. Yeah, I'm fine," I slurred, brushing it off. But my focus wavered as I looked up, directly into the eyes of a Chuck E. Cheese animatronic clad in a purple shirt. Its beaming plastic eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that felt almost alive. For a moment, I froze, trying to remember where I'd last seen this version of Chuck E. But my drunken haze kept the memory just out of reach. "Yo, look what I found!" PJ's voice snapped me back. She held up a handful of gold tokens. their once shiny surface now tarnished and smudged, but the iconic Chuck E. Cheese logo was still visible. "Where did you get those?" I asked, incredulous. PJ dumped the coins into my hand with a triumphant grin. "Let's play something." She motioned toward the arcade games. Scoffing, I glanced back at the glass cases. They reminded me of a museum exhibit, displaying long-forgotten artifacts. "Maybe I'll win you something," I joked, fiddling with the coins. The arcade felt like a graveyard for forgotten dreams. The machines stood dormant, their screens blank, but the sight of them was enough to stir a wave of nostalgia. To my surprise, the coin slots were clean, devoid of cobwebs, as if someone had been tending to them. The air smelled oddly fresh. No dust, no decay, just a strange, sterile cleanliness. PJ lingered near the ball pit, her attention drawn by its colorful plastic spheres, while I gravitated toward a game I had saved for last as a kid, the pirate ship. I approached the machine, my fingers itching to spin the wheel like I had years ago. But before I could, a loud thud echoed across the room. Startled, I turned toward the ball pit. PJ was wading through the sea of plastic balls, her feet disappearing into the colorful chaos. She waved at me with a goofy grin. "Hey, this is still fun." I chuckled nervously. "Glad you're enjoying yourself." As I turned back to the pirate game, a jarring sound burst through the silence. A cacophony of tinny, nautical-themed music erupting from the machine. "What the hell?" I muttered, my unease growing. The screen flickered to life, displaying an animated ocean and a menu screen. It was the only machine in the arcade that was powered on. My eyes darted around the room. Every other game remained dead, their screens blank and lifeless. I glanced toward the stage. The animatronics hadn't moved, but Chuck E.'s eyes still seemed to follow me, unblinking and unervingly focused. The pirate game's music grew louder, a chaotic blend of flutes and fiddles that clawed at my nerves. I turned toward the ball pit to call out to PJ, but she wasn't there. "PJ?" I called, my voice shaky. Silence. The pit was empty, the colorful balls undisturbed. It was as if she had vanished. Suddenly, a loud mechanical crunch filled the air, followed by the clattering sound of tickets spewing from the pirate game. The machine celebrated my win with a victorious fanfare, though I hadn't even touched the controls. I stared at the tickets spilling onto the floor, their length growing impossibly long. The music reached a maddening crescendo, and my head spun with unease. "PJ!" I called again, louder this time. A heavy footstep echoed behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. There, emerging from the shadows, was the purple shirt Chuck E. animatronic. Its movements were jerky, its joints groaning with every step. And its eyes, those unblinking, gleaming eyes, were fixed on me. The arcade was a desolate graveyard of blank screens and silent machines. The footsteps that once echoed had stopped, leaving only the hollow thud of my own frantic heartbeat. "PJ?" My trembling voice cut through the stillness, but there was no reply, no voice, no whisper, nothing. I turned toward the glass prize case, hoping to see something that would break the mounting tension. The overpriced trinkets were still there, glinting faintly under the dim light. But one thing was off. The playful animatronic Chuck E. behind the case was gone. "PJ, this isn't funny," I called, forcing a calm tone that betrayed the cold fear crawling up my spine. I stole one last glance at the arcade, ignoring the childish voice in my head begging me to run. Pocketing the tokens PJ had given me, I quickened my pace toward the ball pit. My footsteps echoed through the eerily pristine space. "PJ!" I shouted, louder this time. Still nothing. The ball pit was lifeless, its surface unervingly still, as if it had never been touched. No ripples, no movement, just a sea of vibrant plastic frozen in time. I glanced back at the stage. The animatronic band stood frozen, their postures unchanged. Or so I thought. Chucky's head was now tilted to the side, his unblinking eyes fixed squarely on me. Helen's head had tilted too, her lifeless gaze mirroring his. A chill ran down my spine. "PJ, I'm done," I shouted, my voice shaking. "Let's go." As I neared the ball pit, a loud click cut through the silence, and I turned to see the photo machine flicker to life. Its once blank screen now glowed with vibrant colors, accompanied by an upbeat, distorted rendition of Smash Mouth's All Star. I froze in place as old photos began flashing across the screen, grainy, cheerful snapshots of families and children, captured in all their 90s glory. "PJ," I called again, softer this time. No answer. I pulled my hoodie tighter as I turned to face the photo machine. The screen froze on a single image, a family portrait. It was me. 7-year-old Kyle stood front and center, beaming in a Braves t-shirt and gym shorts, flanked by my smiling parents. The neon-lit arcade behind us glowed with life and joy. I staggered toward the screen, horrified yet transfixed. My hand reached out on its own, fingers tracing the image. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The memory hit me like a tidal wave. I was back in 1999, chasing cheap plastic prizes, my parents cheering me on, the arcade alive with laughter. The best years of my life frozen in that photo. I fought the tears welling up, swallowing the lump in my throat. The cold air grounded me, but the flood of emotions kept me rooted in place. Another photo slid onto the screen, replacing mine. This time, it was PJ and her younger brother, Justin. They were grinning ear to ear, their smiles radiating pure joy as they stood in this very Chuck E. Cheese years ago. The screen's brightness suddenly flared, blinding me. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes. "Damn it!" I yelled, blinking rapidly to recover. When my vision cleared, I glanced at the screen again. A fresh photo stared back at me. It was me standing right there at the machine, captured in the moment. But I wasn't alone. Behind me stood the animatronic Chuck E., his lifeless grin stretched wide, his oversized eyes boring into the back of my head. A shiver of pure terror shot through me. I spun around, but the Chuck E. animatronic was gone. The silence shattered as "Wannabe" by the Spice Girls blared from the stage speakers, its volume cranked up to an unbearable level. My head whipped toward the stage, my growing dread screaming at me to run. The animatronics were no longer in their static poses. Chucky and his bandmates stood poised, their lifeless bodies now angled toward me, as if ready to perform. Chucky's eyes glinted under the stage lights, and his mouth moved. The music continued to blast, but through it all, I swore I heard a single mechanical phrase escape his plastic lips. "Wanna play?" The animatronic band jerked to life, moving in disjointed, awkward motions that resembled a robot learning to dance for the first time. Their stiff limbs and twitching heads moved to the beat of the distorted music blaring from unseen speakers. I glanced at the ball pit one last time. "PJ!" I screamed, desperation cracking my voice. "Come on, we have to go." Nothing. No movement. No reply. Panic surged through me as I bolted for the hallway. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and the closer I got to the exit, the louder the arcade machines grew. Mechanical crunches and warped, rhythmic tones filled the air, their unsettling chorus chasing me down. Every game seemed alive, pouring out a chaotic cacophony as though mocking my escape attempt. I risked a glance over my shoulder and froze for a split second. The Chucksters band had left the stage. All 4 animatronics were advancing, their glowing eyes locked onto me, their movements jittery and unnatural under the strobe lights. Chucky led the pack, his toothy grin more menacing than ever. "Hell no," I muttered under my breath, fumbling with my phone to light the pitch-black hallway ahead of me. The phone's beam wavered as I stumbled drunkenly, slamming into the walls. Behind me, the heavy thud of animatronic footsteps echoed, relentless and closing in. The speakers blasted a distorted version of Sugar Ray's Fly, the once familiar tune now twisted into an eerie, disorienting nightmare. I reached the back door, my hands scrambling to push it open, when I felt a freezing grip latch onto my arm. "Kyle," a voice growled behind me. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. PJ was there, standing calmly beside me. But something was wrong. Her face was unnervingly serene, her expression far too blank for someone in the middle of this chaos. Behind her, a group of children appeared, all under the age of 10. Their faces were pale and emotionless, their smiles frozen and unnatural. "It's okay, Kyle," PJ said, her tone flat and detached. She leaned closer, her lips curling into a sly, unnatural grin. "It's all right." Fear flooded my veins as I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened, her fingers digging into my arm like steel claws. "PJ, come on," I shouted, yanking against her hold. But the footsteps behind me quickened, echoing like a stampede. Chucky and his band were closing in. "We can't go, Kyle," PJ whispered, her monotone voice sending chills down my spine. I turned back to the children. Their frozen smiles had twisted into something more sinister, their eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Justin stood among them, his grin the widest, his laugh the loudest. "This is where you belong," PJ said softly. "No!" I screamed, struggling harder. As if in response to my growing terror, the footsteps stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was deafening. I looked down the hallway. There they were, the 5 animatronics. Chucky stood at the front, his oversized grin and lifeless eyes fixed on me. Behind him, the others loomed like a macabre army, their frozen forms eerily still. The music swirled around them, a warped, personal soundtrack to my growing nightmare. "Come with us, Kyle," PJ coaxed. "No!" I shouted, panic surging. The children began to laugh, their giggles rising into a haunting, echoing chorus. Even PJ joined in, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. Desperate, I tried to break free, but her grip was inhumanly strong. My struggle only seemed to amuse her, her blank eyes boring into mine. "Let go of me!" I yelled, grabbing the only weapon I had, a handful of tokens from my pocket. With all my strength, I flung the tokens at her outstretched hand. One struck true, slicing through her skin. PJ didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, her smile growing wider as she held up her hand. My stomach churned as I saw the damage. The skin on her palm had peeled away, revealing dark metal and tangled wires beneath. PJ wasn't human. "Please, Kyle," she whispered, taking a slow, twitching step toward me. Behind her, the children's laughter grew louder, their voices mingling with the arcade's distorted music. And then I noticed something else. The animatronics were no longer frozen. They twitched, their joints creaking as they turned to face me. Chucky's gaze burned into mine, his grin impossibly wide. PJ took another step closer, her movements jerky and unnatural, her once familiar voice a hollow echo of the friend I thought I knew. My mind screamed for me to run, but my legs felt rooted in place as I realized the horrifying truth. PJ wasn't my friend anymore. She was something else, and I was next. "I just want to fly," PJ sang softly, their voice hollow and devoid of life. Their unnerving tone echoed through the hallway as they stepped closer, their eyes gleaming with something far from human. "PJ," I whispered, my voice trembling as I stared into their unblinking, uncanny gaze. They moved with an eerie grace, as if the dim hallway had transformed into their stage. The children's laughter provided the soundtrack, their haunting giggles bouncing off the walls. Behind them, the animatronics stood still, silent witnesses to the unfolding nightmare. "Put your arms around me, baby," PJ crooned, their voice cracking with a synthetic distortion. "Put your arms around me, baby." Surrendering to my growing terror, I turned and shoved the back door open with all my strength. The icy January wind hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop. I leaped out into the cold night, breathing heavily. My trembling hands fumbled to close the door behind me, and through the glass, I could still see them. PJ stood there, surrounded by the children, who clung to them like devoted followers. They smiled as a group, their faces eerily serene, like they were posing for one of Chuck E. Cheese's photo booth pictures. And then, as if sensing my gaze, PJ's smile grew wider. I ran. I didn't stop until the lights of that cursed building were far behind me. Over the years, I've told people about that Chuck E. Cheese, the one on Main and Rhoda, but no one believes me. The police checked it out, but they found nothing. No strange machines, no animatronics, no laughing children. They told me the building hadn't had electricity for over a decade. But I know what I saw. I still have a few of those ugly tokens as proof. Tangible reminders of the horrors I experienced that night. I can't look at them without shivering. And then there are the nightmares. But recently, something happened that shook me to my core. I got a friend request on Facebook from PJ Brackett. The profile picture looks exactly like them. The PJ I thought I knew. Or maybe the animatronic pretending to be them. I didn't accept the request. I didn't block it either. I just stared. I don't know what's real anymore. Call it trauma, call it paranoia, but I have trouble trusting anyone these days. Sometimes I wonder if PJ was ever real. And then, late at night, another question creeps into my mind. A whisper from the depths of my fear. Who's to say I'm real? Maybe PJ was right all along. Maybe I really do belong at that Chuck E. Cheese.